Hey guys, welcome back to the 13th part of my series previewing the 2020-21 NBA season, and today we're talking about the Los Angeles Clippers. So, last season the Clippers finished with a 48-32 record and were one of the favorites to win the NBA championship. There's a lot of pressure on them and expectations after signing Kawhi Leonard and Paul George in the offseason. They ended up with the second seed, and in the first round they defeated the Dallas Mavericks in 6 games. And then after going up 3-1 in the second round against the Denver Nuggets, in what can only be described as an absolute collapse and implosion, they managed to blow a 3-1 lead and not give us the Lakers-Clippers conference finals that we were all expecting, and just become one of the most disappointing teams ever. And the fallout from this was huge. Obviously, one of the main culprits was Paul George, who played terribly in the playoffs. But he hasn't been moved, and he's still on the team. But someone who is no longer a part of the Clippers organization is Doc Rivers, who was fired, rightly or wrongly. I'm not too sure. He did make some questionable decisions. The first thing that comes to mind is obviously him playing Harrell over Zubac in the Nuggets season, when it was quite clear that they are much better with Zubac on the floor instead of Harrell. He's replaced with Tyronn Lue, someone who has won a championship, but Lue was the assistant, so I'm not too sure how much that will change things. But Clippers fans will really be hoping that it does change something. So this offseason they were quite active. First thing they did at the draft is they traded Landry Shamet for Luke Kennard. I mean, I'd say it's a good trade for them. Obviously, losing Shamet and his shooting really hurts, but it didn't appear that the coaching staff really trusted him. And in Luke Kennard, you get someone who's still a good shooter, not Shamet's level, but can also do a bit of shot creating. So, pretty good move for them. They also lost Montrezl Harrell and Jermichael Green to free agency, which sucks for them, but Harrell really wasn't playing well in that Nuggets series, and his value really plummeted. And then Green, I mean, he wasn't playing too much for them, so it's not a big deal. And they replaced Harrell with Ibaka, which I think is an upgrade. And they also brought in Nick Batum. And as well as that, they re-signed Marcus Morris. Really, the Clippers have to do everything they can to keep Kawhi Leonard and Paul George, because they both have player options at the end of the season, and if they decline them and leave, the Clippers are in a lot of trouble with like almost all their picks belonging to the Oklahoma City Thunder. So perhaps the team with the most at risk this season, and they're going to have to perform. So if we look at a projected lineup, I think the starting lineup, probably not the crunch time lineup, but the starting lineup could be Patrick Beverley, Paul George, Kawhi Leonard, Marcus Morris, and Ivica Zubac. So Beverley at point guard, I mean, he's a solidish player. Doesn't give you too many points, but is a good rebounder. Not as good as a playmaker as you'd like, but he still brings a lot of effort and intensity, and he's a really annoying defender, always getting up in your face and trying to poke the ball away. Some people think he takes it too far, but still a solid and valuable player for them. And he is getting older, but we'll see. They also have Paul George, who, as I said, just a terrible playoff run and just a terrible season in general. When the Clippers traded for him, he was coming off a season where he was top 3 in MVP voting, so I think his stock has dropped a lot, but let's not forget how good a player Paul George was. This season averaged about 22 points, 6 boards, and 4 assists, and just not up to his standards, but I think he'll respond this season. He didn't really like the way he's being used in the offense. I'm not sure if he has too much to complain about there, but he's a really, really good player, and I think we're going to see a bit of a Paul George revenge tour this season if he can be 100% healthy and all that. So, obviously still a really good player, and I'm predicting that he's going to bounce back this season. And of course, Kawhi Leonard. Kawhi Leonard last season, 27 points, 7 rebounds, 5 assists. The only reason he wasn't in the MVP conversation is because he was resting too much and load managing. So we'll see, with the season being even more condensed this year, how many games he plays. But if he does play quite a few games, he's going to play well in those games, and Clippers are going to be definitely still going to be a good team. He's still also one of the best defenders. I think he's a bit less committed to the defensive end now that he's asked to do more in offense, but when he wants to, he can really lock in and be maybe the best defender in the league. Kawhi's stock has really fallen just because of that Game 7 performance, but still a really good player, so we'll see about that. But Kawhi Leonard and Paul George, not too many better defensive two-way duos than them who can do it on both ends, and we'll see if they can step up this season, especially in the postseason, and for Paul George just the whole year. They also re-signed Marcus Morris to 4 years, $64 million. That's a bit more than I'd like to pay him, but sort of with Harrell leaving, they sort of had to keep him, he can give you some solid scoring and shot making. Just a solid all-round player. Don't have too many strong opinions on Marcus Morris, but I suspect he'll be on the floor in crunch time and just being a solid player. And then I think they'll start Zubac, just because their backup center Ibaka, last season for the Raptors, he was coming off the bench when Marc Gasol was healthy, so I think Zubac will start, and he didn't get as many minutes as I would have liked last season. Only averaged 8 points and 8 rebounds, but he's a good, really good rim protector. He's a good rebounder. He's just a solid all-round player, and I'd like to see him get more minutes because I think he's a really solid player and can really help the Clippers out, especially guarding guys like Jokic and Davis, or I'm not sure about Davis, but like Jokic and other centers. I think he can do a better job than Harrell did, and think he's going to really help them out. As for the bench, Clippers are a pretty deep team. Reggie Jackson, I think they picked him up later on in the season. 9 points, 3 assists, 3 rebounds, just a solid player. And you're going to need depth this season with the season being so condemned, and you never know if players are going to miss time due to the virus and things like that. They also have Lou Williams, who is always in the running for Sixth Man of the Year. Averaged 18 points a game, 6 assists. I think his assists may take a hit because a lot of those assists were when him and Harrell would come into the game and run pick and roll, pick and roll, pick and roll. And that was really effective. But one thing with Lou Williams is he never shows up in the playoffs. So with getting Luke Kennard, maybe they could look to trade him. I'm not too sure. But in the regular season can definitely provide solid scoring. And they'll hope that in this postseason he can step his game up. They also have traded for Luke Kennard, averaged about 16 points a game. Similar things to Lou Williams, but a bit different. Can just score the ball quite a bit, and just more depth and more scoring. So I don't think they're going to struggle for perimeter bench scoring with Lou Williams and Luke Kennard and even Reggie Jackson. They also signed Nick Batum. He hasn't played in a while, but he's a solid all-round player depending on how he looks. I just don't really know, but it would definitely help them if he was healthy and ready to go, and because they don't really have that. I think something underrated is Batum was a good passer, so with a team that doesn't really have a great playmaker, he can definitely help out with ball movement, which is something they struggled with last season. Last season they were looking for just, when you have players as good as Kawhi and Paul George and Lou Williams, you tend to say just give them the ball and they can make a shot. But as you can see, those guys can go cold like they did in Game 7 of the Western Conference semifinals against the Nuggets. And when that happens, if you don't have a good system and you can't get easy baskets, then you're in trouble. So hopefully they'll move the ball a bit more. They'll have a system to get them easier buckets instead of just relying on Kawhi to make mid-rangers. which, he can do it, but you'd like to get him getting easier things at the rim instead of having to rely on tough shots. And the same goes for Paul George and Lou Williams. So we'll see about that, but that just was a concern for the Clippers last season. I'm worried about it again this season. Finally, Serge Ibaka, who I'm a real big fan of, averaged about 15 and 8 last season, so clearly can still give you some points and rebounds, but just what he does on offense, can shoot the three a bit, can shoot the mid-range, can finish inside, and then defensively, he's not as good a shot blocker as he was before, but he's still a good shot blocker and a good defender, so if he can stay healthy, he can really, really help them out, and I suspect their closing lineup will be Paul George, Kawhi Leonard, Serge Ibaka, blank, blank. Maybe Marcus Morris, Luke Kennard, Lou Williams, Patrick Beverley. Those are all guys in the mix for the closing lineup. But I think Ibaka should definitely be on the floor for that because he is just a great player on both ends. So for the strength of this team, I think it's quite obvious, like on the wings, they have Paul George and Kawhi Leonard, who are two of the best players in the NBA, and I suspect they'll be a bit hungry this season and a bit of a revenge tour. So if they're playing well, then obviously that's going to help them a lot. And if your NBA is really about the stars, so they're going to just step up, especially in the postseason. This also, I think it'll be a really good defensive team. Here are some of the good defenders they have. Patrick Beverley, Paul George, Kawhi Leonard, Marcus Morris, Ivica Zubac, Serge Ibaka, and then Reggie Jackson's an okay defender. So a lot of good defensive players, and especially with wing players, they're going to be hard to defend against, to score against. And so they can definitely provide a lot of defensive toughness and just be a really good defensive team. They also have a good balance between offense and defense, can get plenty of points and can shut down teams if they need. They're also a really deep team. Like, I just named 5 bench players who can really contribute for them. And they also have Kai Bowman, Terrence Mann, Patrick Patterson. So they're a really deep team. So especially if someone goes down injured, they can definitely compensate for that, and it wouldn't hurt them as much as it could hurt another team. And finally, they have a lot of really good shot makers. Like, Kawhi can make tough shots, Paul George can make tough shots, Lou Williams can make tough shots. So they can definitely make tough shots and score when it gets tighter. For the downside, they're kind of chokers, They choked last season. The Clippers have a history of blowing 3-1 leads and choking. And they don't really have that winning mentality. And I'm not confident in them being able to close out a team if they're 3-1 up, or if it's a game 7. I'm just not confident because they just don't have that. I don't know if it's a mentality or a belief or something like that, but I just don't have the confidence in this team. Another big weakness is playmaking. There was rumors that they were going to trade for a player who could playmake or sign one in free agency. That didn't end up happening. There's no real guy who can get you over 6 assists a game and really be that true point guard and calm the offense down and get guys going, that type of thing. They sort of do like a playmaking by committee, like Beverly averages 4 assists, Paul George 4 assists, Kawhi 5, Lou Williams 6, Reggie Jackson could average 5 if he played more, that type of thing. But they don't have that one guy who can just steady the offense and take over playmaking duties if they need. So that's really something that could hurt them, and it really did hurt them in the playoffs. And finally, they rely on difficult shots too much. They don't have a system to get them easy buckets. They rely on tough mid-range shots from their star players, and that's okay, but you'd like them to be getting easier looks, and that's really worrying for me for the Clippers. As for where they could finish, I mean, it really depends on their stars and how much they play and how well they play, but I'm confident in Paul George really stepping his game up this season compared to last season and a little bit of a revenge tour. So I'm going to be pretty optimistic, and I'm going to say they're going to get the second seed in the West. Anyways, thanks for watching, guys.